Greetings all from Australia. Thanks for the opportunity to present today, Bernard. I'm going to talk about how we take research from the lab or the field and turn it into operational applications to help the industry. My main role is conducting operational forest health surveillance, and so I've got a unique opportunity to be able to see what happens in the plantation estate, identify research needs, and then develop those into forest health applications. And so today I'm going to talk about, I'll present 3 case studies of how we've done that in Australia. The first one is Cyrix wood wasp. Cyrix noctilio is a major pest in pine plantations in Australia. We've developed a biological control program that utilises stressed trees. So Cyrix females are attracted to stressed trees. We poison these trees to make them attractive to Cyrix oviposition, and then we inject the biocontrol nematode into these trees, which ultimately sterilises the Cyrix females. But what we've been seeing in Australia is that Ips granicolis, which is also an exotic pest, is also attracted to these stressed trees and has been attacking these trap tree plots that we've set up for Cyrix biocontrol. So we weren't too sure whether this interaction between Cyrix and Ips was going to affect our Cyrix biocontrol program. And so the first part of research that we conducted here was we conducted detailed surveys across the plantation estate to identify where the problems were, and this would ultimately assist in where we would target our intervention. We conducted laboratory and field experiments into the interactions between Ips and Cyrix and their respective fungi, and we found that the Ips fungus, Ophiostoma, outcompetes the Cyrix fungus. And here you can see the Ips fungus Ophiostoma totally throughout these logs, and Cyrix larvae are only in the areas where Ips isn't. We also found that Ips attack deters Cyrix oviposition, and that Ips attack in trees reduces the amount of Cyrix that emerges from trap trees, but also reduces the parasitism, overall parasitism coming out of those trees. And so this work illustrated that Ips and Ophiostoma do actually reduce the effectiveness of the Cyrix biocontrol program. Through this research, we found a range of direct and indirect effects of Ips attacking our Cyrix trap tree plots. The other thing we did in this research was utilise data and observations from growers from the forest industry via our National Cyrix Coordination Committee. And this is important to have these strong links between the researchers and the industries. And this helps for the outcomes from the research to be owned and taken up by industry. And how then did we apply that research? So from this research, we tweaked the trap tree plot establishment techniques to reduce Ips attack. We realised that we should be using more of the naturally struck trees that are out there to inoculate the nematodes into. And we also produced some training videos to get this information out to the broader grower community and ensure that the techniques have been used correctly. And the overall result was less trap trees attacked by Ips, so a successful result. The second problem that I'll talk about today is how we get how do we produce accurate maps of pest outbreaks to improve pest management applications. In Australia, we conduct aerial surveys over the pine plantation estate using digital aerial sketch mapping techniques. And you can see the type of data that we produce. But what we find is there's a lot of variation in pest attack. In this particular slide here, you can see some intense areas of tree mortality and some lower areas of tree mortality. And the maps that we produce from those through the aerial sketch mapping are fairly broad brush. They're big areas relatively and broad classes of severity. And so what we looked at here was how we can fine-tune this process to produce better outcomes for the growers. And so what we did here is we combined remote sensing technologies with machine learning to see whether we can produce better outputs. So firstly, we grabbed a bunch of imagery, infrared, RBG, and a range of other layers, developed those, did the photogrammetry, and then we went through this machine learning process where we trained the data to be able to detect green trees as well as dead trees. And this utilised traits such as the height of the tree, the shape of the tree, the size of the tree, the colour of the tree, and also looked at the shadows as well to detect and separate out dead and live trees. And we found that was quite successful in this particular case study. And so we're now looking at utilising this operationally in the field. And so we've got a camera strapped off the bottom of the helicopter. And as I'm flying around the plantation estate, I can be mapping some of these areas where we're seeing pest outbreaks, but also capturing some photo imagery, capturing some imagery. We then process that data, bring it back into the lab, process it, and start training the model. And so here we've got dead and live and sick trees trained on this particular imagery. And then we can produce much more detailed maps for the growers. So if you compare this heat map, the individual trees identified here, compare that to my much broader sketch maps. And this makes it a lot easier for the growers to go in and target areas that they may need to do, for in this case, biological control, nematodes. And the final case study I'll talk about today is really focusing or targeting the students in the room. So often what we find is that our research is one part of the puzzle that makes up the whole picture. And so what you find you can have is that your individual piece of research, your PhD or a chapter in your PhD, gets pulled together with all sorts of other research that's happened, and this then gets used to produce a solution or an application out in the field. Conversely, you yourself as a researcher, as an applied researcher, as a field researcher, can use a bunch of other people's research, pull that together to develop solutions and applications that can be used in the field. So the example I'll use is quite topical at the moment. As many of you be aware, we've had some massive fires in Australia that have burnt lots and lots of area of forest, including about 100,000 hectares of pine plantations. And what we find, we can salvage those trees, but after a while they get pest attack from bark beetles and blue stain fungi, which results in log downgrade. And so we need to be able to work out how we can assist the forest industry deal with that and monitor that. So in this particular case, we're using other people's research. I don't need to do any research because someone's already worked out that bark beetles are attracted to stressed or burnt trees and that they vector blue stain fungi into these trees. There's research has already shown that bark beetles and blue stain, as well as reductions in moisture content, result in timber downgrade, and that we can monitor beetles with pheromones and other types of lures. And we can also use remote sensing to help us produce risk maps. And so how have we applied all those other people's research? The first thing we did was using remote sensing. We've modelled satellite imagery to produce burn intensity maps, and this helps us focus our monitoring programs, but also prioritise our salvage logging. We've established a network of traps to monitor bark beetle populations. Through that process, we're also felling and dissecting and assessing blue stain within the trees. And we're then building all that together to feed into the salvage logging program, where they should be doing some logging, where they can hold off doing some logging because the bark beetles haven't increased yet. And ultimately that feeds into supplying continued supply of the timber mills. And in this particular case, making sure that the town of Tumut stays viable. And so that's me for today. For those that are interested, there's some of the papers that I've touched on today. And thanks very much for having me. And I'm happy to receive any questions. Thank you.